Good morning, everyone. I want to start off by telling a little story from my high school experience. During my sophomore year of high school, my class had a newly hired English teacher who was brand new to PEP. Since I had gotten straight A's throughout my freshman year, I expected my first paper of sophomore year to exceed my teacher's expectations. Now, imagine my shock and horror when I opened my gradebook to see a 79%, the first C I had ever received in an assignment. When my classmates and I confronted our teacher, his response was, "Your grades don't matter." We immediately responded saying things like, "Our grades do matter. If I get bad grades, I won't be able to graduate, go to a good college, or get a good job." This was how I felt at 15 years old. But as the years passed, so did my anger, and the phrase "grades don't matter" has taken on a brand new meaning. I began to ask myself, why do grades matter? Yes, they inform colleges about a student's academic performance, but how accurately do grades truly measure that student's learning? Do grades really motivate students to work to the best of their abilities? And if grades are not doing what they're supposed to do, why do they hold so much value? After years of thought and months of research, I finally found the answers to these questions about the American grading system. The practice of grading in American schools originates in the early 19th century. Originally, most schools simply taught basic skills such as reading and writing. But by 1871, nearly every northern state had tax-funded free schools, improving education for all children. As better education became more accessible, college admissions offices now had to strictly evaluate students with a set grading scale. In 1898, Harvard University created the now familiar grading scale, with the letters A through F paired with percentages. In the 1940s, this letter grading system became widespread and is now used for students of all ages. Before diving into the bulk of the argument, it's first important to understand the two main types of grading that I will discuss. The current or traditional grading system is characterized by broad or undefined grading criteria: late penalties, fewer or no retakes, evaluation based on points and percentages, and emphasis on high scoring. It uses an A through F scale to assess each assignment that a student completes. At the end of the quarter or semester, these grades are typically gathered into a weighted average to determine a student's final grade. Mastery grading, as the name infers, focuses on a student's overall mastery at the end of the course. Students are not penalized with late credit and can revise and retake assignments as needed to help with the learning process. The purpose of mastery grading is to teach students that they are not working toward a grade, but toward learning itself. Despite traditional grading's presence in America, it does not succeed in its intended purpose, to help students learn. So why should we care? Well, the qualifications for an A from one teacher may look completely different from another, more strict teacher, but each A looks identical to college admissions offices. Because of this, colleges may deny perfectly worthy and capable students of great opportunities because letter grades have misrepresented their abilities. Additionally, the mere pressure of grades can greatly harm a student's mental health. In an essay about Christian higher education, David A. Winkler writes, quote, "A quick Google search yields many recent results related to college students taking their own lives due to the stress of perfectionism, performance expectations, and depression. The fact that college students often consider their grades and academic performance as contingencies of their self-worth is at best troubling and at worst life-threatening. The distressing effect of grades to the point that students are willing to take their own lives over them is reason enough to question whether or not grades are impacting students for the better." Since traditional grading has not changed for nearly a century, improvement for the future may seem unlikely. However, we should not ignore the flaws of traditional grading simply because a solution seems out of reach. Alfie Kohn, an educational author and lecturer, writes, quote, "If we're committed to making things better, we may find ourselves calling into question our most fundamental and least examined institutions," end quote. In order for the grading system to improve for the benefit of future students, the current generation must first point out its flaws. Many schools across America, including Melrose High School in Massachusetts and Chatsworth High School in California, have already begun to reject traditional grading in favor of mastery programs. In addition, educators, even in traditional schools, have implemented mastery grading into their classrooms. The small steps taken by these teachers and schools are vital to giving future generations better educations, with learning at the center. This brings me to my thesis statement. The American education system should integrate mastery practices in order to properly, 1, evaluate student learning, 2, communicate academic performance to students, parents, and colleges, and 3, motivate students to work to the best of their abilities. The first aspect of grading that I will discuss is evaluation of student learning. In his TED Talk about mastery grading, Sal Khan, the creator of Khan Academy, says that when a student takes a test, the gaps in their knowledge are revealed through their grades. But those gaps are rarely filled in. If you get a 75% on a test, that means that you don't know 25% of the material. But you still move on to the next chapter, maybe a more advanced one that builds off of what you should have learned. Khan compares education to home building. If the foundation of a house is only 80% stable, you don't build the first floor until the foundation is fixed. If you keep building on a flawed foundation, by the time you build the third floor, the house could easily collapse. Similarly, if you don't understand the foundations of pre-algebra, by the time you build your way through algebra and geometry, how can you expect to understand advanced calculus? Note that this isn't the fault of teachers or even students. Rather, it's the system itself that hinders student learning. On the topic of evaluation, it's also important to think about the factors that affect your grades, even factors completely unrelated to academics. Lori Hugh of Harvard Graduate School of Education points out, students, teachers, parents, and college admissions offices have no idea what a letter grade is really saying, end quote. Imagine a teacher returns a student's essay and the only thing that he writes on the paper is C-. What does this tell the student? Does it mean that they didn't successfully learn how to write a paper? Does it mean that they succeeded in some areas like organization and thesis building, but struggled in other areas? Does it mean that the paper was perfect, but just turned in a few days late? Or does it mean that his teacher is just one of the strict graders? Since there's so much that goes into a student's final grade, it's nearly impossible for students to know where they went wrong in the writing process or how they can improve. The traditional grading places grades on such a high pedestal that it neglects to truly evaluate how much that student has learned. As believers, we must use biblical principles when evaluating student learning. Proverbs 16:11 writes, "The Lord demands accurate scales and balances. He sets the standard for fairness." And Proverbs 11:1 writes, "The Lord detests the use of dishonest scales, but he delights in accurate weights." These verses show the biblical importance of fairness and accuracy in a business context, but the principles described apply to education as well. Based on these verses, it's clearly immoral to cheat someone in a business context when fairness and accuracy are not prioritized. In the same way, when grades incorrectly evaluate student learning, the grading system cheats students of a full learning experience. So, according to biblical principles, unfairly evaluating student learning is definitely unethical in God's eyes. Moving on to the second part of grading, communication of academic performance. We have just discussed how letter grades unproductively measure a student's performance, but what is the alternative? Written feedback is much more helpful than letter grades because it gives students direction for reaching mastery in a subject. Written comments and constructive criticism on an essay directly tell students what they did well and where they may need improvement, whereas the letter B itself does not. However, students often dismiss written feedback. Author Susan M. Brookhart writes, "If a paper is returned with both a grade and a comment, many students will pay attention to the grade and ignore the comment," end quote. The traditional grading system allows students to ignore feedback because it values grades over academic improvement. With mastery grading, on the other hand, feedback is far more valuable than a letter grade because it gives students the keys to mastering the content. This feedback also allows students to use their mistakes in order to work toward mastery. Under the traditional grading system, students can't really make mistakes because every error impacts their grade at the end of the quarter. Traditional grading applies that mistakes are a negative thing because they are punished for them through a low grade. Longtime educator Robert Bosley observes that one of the main ways people learn is through, quote, trial and error. It's through making mistakes and growing and learning from them, end quote. Imagine a student gets an 80% on a math quiz because he didn't understand the Pythagorean theorem, for example. After getting his quiz back, he corrects his mistakes and now understands each of the math concepts used in the chapter. With traditional grading, that 80% remains the same at the end of the quarter, even though he learned from his mistakes. Mastery grading, however, does not penalize that student for making mistakes, but encourages mistakes if they use them as opportunities to learn. As long as the student proves that he understands and has mastered the material by the end of the quarter, he will receive an A in the class. As followers of Christ, we're made in the image of God to build each other up, and in the context of education, we should not act any differently. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them." The communication of a student's performance should have the intent of building a student up in the learning process, not tearing them down. If the purpose of grades is to help students learn, we should not punish them for going through natural parts of the learning process, because that is neither good nor helpful for student learning. The third and final aspect of grading that I will discuss is motivation for students to work. You might wonder, if students don't receive a reward for doing their work, why would they want to put in any effort at all? Well, rewards actually do the opposite of their intended purpose, which is motivation. This is because rewards like grades are extrinsic motivators, not intrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivation is an external reward, like money or a grade, whereas intrinsic motivation is an internal reward, like the feeling of accomplishment or satisfaction. The A through F scale extrinsically motivates students by rewarding them for completing individual assignments, but mastery grading intrinsically motivates students with a broader end goal of becoming experts in their classes. Their mastery in a topic is not a reward for their efforts, but a byproduct of hard work. So how do rewards realistically affect performance? Studies performed on subjects of all ages conclude that rewards actually decrease performance. For instance, subjects who were rewarded for quitting smoking were more likely to smoke again, and those who were promised prizes were twice as likely to lie about quitting. When memorizing words, children who received candy or the promise of candy got fewer right. And in education, children who are extrinsically motivated use less sophisticated learning strategies and score lower than children who are interested in learning for its own sake. When people are motivated by extrinsic rewards, they have little to no reason to put any effort into their work. For example, if a mom tells her son that he can have ice cream if he cleans his room, what'll he do? He might throw his clothes into the closet and shove toys under his bed until his room is just clean enough for his mother's approval and reward. Similarly, it's extremely common for students to skip out on fully reading books in favor of 3-minute summaries, or asking ChatGPT. Why should students spend hours working when they can get the same grade result by doing the bare minimum? If the grading system tells students that they need a reward for learning, they will internally view school as a means to an end rather than something that can actually benefit their lives. The Bible says in Colossians 3:23, "Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people." When we work for the sake of an extrinsic reward instead of glorifying God, we're making an idol out of education. Rather than working for external rewards or human validation, students and educators alike need to see the inherent value of education at its core, which is growing in wisdom and honoring God through our work. Now, moving on to a few counter-arguments. Many believe that it's far too unrealistic for the grading system to change now because it's already firmly established. However, change is necessary for society to progress and will naturally come with time. Sal Khan, again the creator of Khan Academy, observed that 400 years ago in Western Europe, only 15% of the population knew how to read. If you asked someone back then, what percentage of the population is capable of reading? They might answer, with a great education system, maybe 20 or 30%. Now we know that that guess is way too pessimistic because nearly 100% of Americans know how to read. Similarly, if someone asks you, what percentage of the population is capable of understanding calculus, for example, you might answer in the same way. With a great education system, maybe 20 or 30%. Maybe in 400 more years, if the grading system improves, nearly 100% of Americans will be able to understand calculus as well. Some may also say that mastery grading is too difficult and time-consuming for teachers to implement. In my interview with college professor Kiera Burns, she said that mastery grading is absolutely realistic, even for public school teachers. The problem with traditional grading is not the letter grades themselves, but the process by which they attempt to help students learn. Burns still uses grades, but has created her grade book so that she can give students credit for completing their assignments and tasks and for improving their skills long term. She encourages students to constantly revise their work and does not take off points for late assignments. One of the tasks required is visiting the Writing Center to receive one-on-one feedback from Burns herself. While this may seem like a lot of work, Burns says that it actually saves her time in the long run. According to Burns, working with students one-on-one actually decreases the amount of effort because she is getting better written papers. This saves her tons of time in the grading process, which is the most time-consuming part of her job. Since Burns is required to have office hours, she uses that time to guide her students through the writing process instead of spending more time grading poorly written papers. As a result of her grading style, her students put in more effort and write better papers. Some may also worry that if students don't get grades, they won't get accepted into college. Grades can decrease student learning, but they still do in a sense dictate their futures in college. According to Professor Zoe B., there are plenty of schools that don't grade students that also have great college acceptance rates. She continues saying, what means more to a college? A list of letters or an actual letter written by that student's teacher that tells colleges about that student's achievements and who they are as a person. In place of assignment grades, students have written feedback describing their skills and weaknesses, which is much more informative than a letter grade alone. With mastery grading, students have both feedback on individual assignments and grades measuring their mastery at the end of the course as well. This allows colleges to have detailed descriptions of students while also having the grades necessary to compare them with other applicants. Overall, the current American grading system does not successfully evaluate student learning, communicate academic performance to students, or motivate students to actually learn. However, grading with mastery in mind ensures that a student actually improves throughout the year by giving credit where credit is due. Mastery grading gives students the ability to learn well by allowing revisions, giving feedback, and using intrinsic motivation. All of these characteristics of mastery grading work toward a final goal, to create students who are hard workers and passionate learners. Now, to revisit my original question, why do grades matter? The thing is, grades really don't matter, at least not in the way that most people think. A grade is just a measurement of how much a student has learned. So if a grade does not accurately measure a student's learning, does it really matter at all? Did I learn anything from the C that my teacher gave me in 10th grade? At the time, I couldn't see that my grade was actually a lesson. It showed me that good grades are not always comparable to good learning because my teacher never really explained why I got a C or how I could improve. But that 79%, along with the anger and resentment coming from my entire class, showed me how much of our high school lives are centered around our grades. We were more concerned about getting A's than actually improving our writing. My goal isn't to tell students to throw their educations out the window and fail all their classes because grades don't matter. It's actually the opposite. My goal is to encourage students because the A or the F written on the top of your papers may not accurately reflect how much you have learned throughout the entire year. School should not be about doing the bare minimum by making Spark Notes, ChatGPT, or your classmates do all their learning for you just so you can get a good grade. It should be about actively participating in learning in order to get something beneficial out of our educations. God created humans to learn throughout our entire lives, so we should not be conditioned to learn only when we're rewarded with the letter A. In conclusion, learn for the sake of learning, and don't let grades get in the way of your education. Thank you.